I'm Bree, one of the co-founders of Frank Body.
Hi, I'm Jess, one of the co-founders of Frank Body.
Welcome to Selfish, a podcast that is all about putting yourself first and redefining the word selfish.
Over this content series, we're exploring a variety of topics with some amazing faces that you'll know, from self-awareness with Brooke Blurton to self-discovery with Jackie Gillies.
We're also talking about self-pleasure with Chantel Otten and self-wealth with the incredible Victoria Devine.
Podcast episodes for Selfish drop weekly on Tuesdays, alongside a whole bunch of amazing tools, tips and tricks from our team that you can find across the Frank Body social channels.
Find us wherever you listen to your podcasts, and let's get selfish together. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, Bree. Oh, you call me Jessica. So formal. I love it.
I know. I don't think I've called you that ever. Usually it's just Jay.
I'm in trouble.
We're delirious.
We are, because we've had a fantastic day of talking to people. We just finished recording with the incredible Courtney Act, who needs no introduction, but we will introduce her anyway.
You probably would know her maybe from Australian Idol. She was on that season in 2003, which, what did she say? It was 23 years ago.
21 years ago.
21 years ago, which blows my mind, makes me feel very, very old. She was also on RuPaul's Drag Race, and she won Celebrity Big Brother UK.
Courtney is just not only an amazing advocate for the queer community, but just in general an advocate for true self-expression. And in this chat, we talk a lot about how her journey with the way she expresses herself, both as Courtney and how he expresses himself as Shane, has changed throughout his life, and the concept of gender fluidity, and a lot of discussion around the sort of outdated stereotypes we have around masculinity and femininity. It was a really fantastic, upbeat, but very in-depth chat. I took a lot away from it.
Yeah, I think it's that perfect combination of intellectual enough to keep your mind thinking, and what Courtney really spoke about was the idea of challenging the way we think and challenging the status quo, and it's the perfect podcast to delve into that.
So listen in and have fun.
So many days getting cold and too lonely, sitting all the time living.
We have the wonderful Courtney Act here. Welcome.
I can't make a full rotation on this chair. Hello,
We can take it
thanks for
again.
having
Do a
me.
12. Yeah.
We were just saying, I don't think you really need an introduction, but we're asking everyone to do it. So I'm going to still throw you under the bus and just
Okay.
ask you to introduce yourself.
My name is Courtney Act. I guess people listening or watching, we're a multimedia
It's a new world.
format. I remember when I had a podcast and people are going, where can I watch this? I'm like, no, it's a podcast. You listen to it.
Yeah.
But now everything's visual, and so you can't say that anymore. You can watch this podcast if you're listening.
I do kind of miss that phase, like when we would do podcasts. I'm like, great.
No makeup, no
makeup,
hair, no
yes.
outfit. Do it from a lounge.
Yep.
My introduction. Well, I'm a drag performer, singer, TV, multiple reality television losing contestant.
I thought you won.
I did win one.
Yeah.
Celebrity Big Brother in the UK, which was probably the most impactful for me career-wise. But I was on RuPaul's Drag Race season 6, which was 10 years ago. So quite often it's like a touchstone that people, depends on who you're talking to, but younger people who have just watched my season of Drag Race in the last few years, they'll come and oh my God, I loved your wings on Drag Race. And I'm like, Drag Race. Oh yeah, 2014. Yeah, no, I remember. No, obviously it's a big part of my career and I love it. But it is funny when people know you from different things. Old people come up and be like, oh, I love your interviews on the ABC.
Love your lady voice.
I know.
Yeah, generic older lady voice. Yeah. And I think I'm a performer at heart, but I also, I think my kink is shifting people's perceptions in incremental ways about things that they always afforded to be true. So just maybe taking people's assumptions of what a drag performer looks like, is like, what a queer person is, and helping evolve or change or give a bigger insight into who I am and hopefully who other people are, and just bring a little bit more understanding and empathy.
What a cool mission.
Amazing.
Reminds me a lot of your time on Celebrity Big Brother and your interactions with Anne Whitcomb.
Anne Whitcomb. Should I give her an introduction?
Yeah, go for it.
23 years of Parliament. She voted against every single piece of pro-LGBT legislation that ever came before her. I mean, that was just the tip of the iceberg. You could continue on. She basically had voted against everybody's rights in that house. She was a older lady. She was 70, very conservative, but weirdly also like the most interesting person in the house.
Yep.
But yeah.
I thought your interactions were very interesting to watch, her and being so conservative. And I can't remember the exact quote, but she talked about, you mentioned that she thanked you for your sort of calm approach to the conversations and being your open-mindedness to her opinion. And I thought that was really interesting and probably had such an amazing impact on so many people who would have held conservative views and would have been watching that show. Like, we probably can't measure that impact, but it really stuck with me.
Yeah, me too. And it was a very telling moment. And it was really, I think it was the second day, because I entered in drag and I remember that I was wearing like a little purple bow tie, so I wasn't in drag. And I remember after this conversation about marriage equality, as you call it, she was like, oh, thank you for that. Thank you for, like, normally people would get angry or irate or throw something or call me a bigot, and I think part of that is I don't feel impacted by Anne's views. Like, I think I'm old enough and I've had enough life experience that I know who I am and I'm comfortable in that. So Anne saying, like, you can't redefine the definition of marriage, and I'm like, well, we have and we continue to do so. I mean, she was Church of England, but she converted to the Catholicism when they started canonizing female priests because she just thought that was a bit too progressive. Women shouldn't be allowed to be priests. And so you get that she does have a mindset that is conservative, as in wants things to stay the same, except probably when it comes to the environment, which is ironic. But I realized in that moment that she wasn't used to being heard and wasn't used to having conversations that I didn't agree with her opinions, obviously, but it was quite a powerful moment. And even her acknowledging that, I think, is that it's those little moments that when you're on the outside, you sometimes think, like, I've had so many imaginary arguments with Piers Morgan in my head.
We all,
right? And I always think, like, I'll be the one. I'll tell him. And then whenever I get invited on his show, I think I just don't want to give that oxygen. So I don't do it. But I always think, like, but I'll be the one who, and I think that's the problem, is that we all, like, have that thought that, like, we'll be the one who'll like finally make him see the light and understand the world from a different point of view. But with Anne, weirdly, I don't think that I really changed her thoughts, but I think maybe, like, the UK public in particular got to see, like, if they're an older conservative person, they were like, and I mean, she said, I think the quote was, Shane's the kind of boy you'd like your grandson to be, but Courtney is a tart. And I was like, yeah, I
love it.
That's true. She's right on both accounts, I think. Unfortunately, I think, her, whilst I agree that I am a tart, I think she, meant it in a way to disparage, not as a praise that I would take it as.
That's so wonderful.
But yeah, it was really interesting, like, just having that, like, that moment where I realized that you can hear someone and have them hear you and kind of agree to disagree, which just feels like a slightly more peaceful way to go about life these days, where everyone's just yelling very loudly at each other.
Yeah. So that's been a conscious shift for you. You haven't always taken that approach, rightly so. You've been angry at times, and
I think I've been pretty lucky that, like, I can't remember ever sort of being vocally angry. I also think, like, I know what my limits are, and I won't start a fight that I can't win.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it is, like, knowing, I'm like, I know that I'm right about this, but I don't want to, like, enter into a full-scale debate about this without all of the facts, because I think it's important to deliver the best sort of side of the argument that I can. But I think part of my privilege is having a mum and dad who loved me and supported me always when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I've not had... I sort of approach things with that like solid base, that solid foundation of feeling loved. So when somebody attacks something about my identity, I don't take it as personally. I realise it's more of a reflection of their limited view of who I am. And usually, like, thus far, I've been able to communicate with everybody quite reasonably. I haven't had any... I mean, even online, I don't get, like, a lot of haters in the comments, which... I don't know. Again, every time I mention that, I'm like, oh, here they come.
They're going to come.
But it's definitely obviously a part of internet culture. But I seem to... I don't know. People seem to receive what I do somewhat reasonably. I try not to participate in the outrage culture of stuff.
Look, I'm with you on any topic. I don't think that outrage culture is particularly helpful and healthy. I think there's times to be angry and need that to initiate change. But your example before, like if you sat in a room with Piers Morgan and tried to just scream at him, well, it's not getting through.
No.
But we can maybe pry the door open little bit by little bit.
Or even like some doors aren't worth bothering
Trying
with.
to open. Yeah.
Like you're better off focusing your attention on maybe the people in the middle who are more reasable and open to change.
Yeah. You go.
You
You mentioned your parents earlier, and having watched your Australian Story, we got to meet them. They seem really beautiful and wonderful. And I don't like to make assumptions, but I probably did, in that they seem to have played such a pivotal role in your life, and the self-acceptance and, you know, that true expression of self. Like I think having that support from our loved ones is really important. And the unfortunate reality for a lot of people in the queer community is that they just don't necessarily get that support and acceptance from their family.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who might be listening who's in that exact position now? They potentially want to be able to express who they are and haven't, or have and have felt shame because of it.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I think the good thing about maybe living in 2024 as opposed to the 80s and 90s when I was growing up is that there was no visibility anywhere of queer people, really. And even in the early 2000s, it was very limited. And so to feel that I was different, whatever that meant, like in high school, it wasn't even about like being attracted to guys, because I hadn't really, I mean, I remember like having crushes on guys and girls in school, but then it was more about the way that I was presenting in the schoolyard that sort of led to bullying and stuff. It was about being, I guess, more feminine. And so not having any examples of that, I always thought, oh God, there's something wrong with me. And that's where the shame comes from. I hope with younger people now, if they're feeling like, you know, they're queer, if they're or any part of their identity that's different, and that they're not feeling support from their family, hopefully there's enough support and examples in the community that they can understand that it's not them. And that it's more a reflection of their family's limited understanding. Because I think, like, when it comes to who you love, you know, as long as it's between two or more consenting adults, that's sort of that's sort of it. I mean, if you're in love with somebody who's the same gender as you or a different gender than you, or maybe you're in a throuple, or who knows what, the sky's the limit. Well, there are limits, but I think that like love and celebrating attraction and difference of attraction is a really wonderful and important thing. And if anything, I think like queer people are even like liberating heteronormative people, if you will, on the foundations of what their primary relationships can look like. I know that because there's been no rule book for two guys in love, you know, as a queer person, I've gotten to like craft a lot of my own understandings of what that might look like. Sometimes, you know, queer people can end up being quite sort of heteronormative about their relationships, but one of the beauties of it is that you kind of get to make the rules yourself. And I think in doing so, then a lot of like straight friends of queer people are like, oh, well, Tim and Ben, you know, have this agreement or that agreement, or they talk about things this way, and there's no man provider and woman who's, you know, being subservient, or there's all sorts of different options available. And I think that's really cool that that queer people can sometimes feel shame because there's no examples of them around, but actually in a way they're liberating other people from their own identities. So it's not always a cross that everyone wants to bear, but there is a little bit of excitement in knowing that me being most authentically myself is something that might help, even if it's just like your friends around you. It doesn't have to be like you're on the telly and you're barking about it to the world.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of shame across all people, especially when it comes to sexuality.
Yeah.
Even with heterosexual relationships, there's still such a blurry area, and there's still so much that's not expressed.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about self-expression, about healthy self-expression, and about how drag became a way of expression for you.
Yeah. When I was 18, I moved to Sydney and I loved performing. Growing up, I was like in a theatre school, so I was always dressing up in costumes, and like I was a mouse in Cinderella, or I was in like different musicals and pantomimes. And so it was the year 2000, and there was no social media, there was no Kardashians, there was no iPhones. It was a very different world. The only information we could get about celebrities was like on the magazines that came out once a week, and that news was already quite old, but we didn't know that then. And for me, the drag queens on Oxford Street were like these local celebrities that I loved watching perform, and they were like our Kardashians or our whoever, like, because they all had different personalities, and you would get to know that and watch them perform, and I found that really exciting back then. And then being a performer myself, I started doing drag, and then I found this lovely mix of being able to perform, which sort of out of drag, like as a boy in the year 2000, I don't know where I would have been able to express that, like maybe like a karaoke night. Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas with drag, I was able to sing, I was able to dance, express myself, like with costumes and hair and makeup. And then the added part to that was that it was feminine, which sort of up until that point, and really for many years after that, there was a very compartmentalized idea of gender in my head, where as Shane out of drag, I should be masculine. I wasn't. I failed miserably at it, but I always felt like I should be more masculine than I was. And then as Courtney, I was just able to like be free, which, you know, is obviously like more of a feminine presentation. And for many years, I think I felt like as Courtney, I had to be like as binary and feminine, like all of I had to sort of pretend that I was a girl in a way. Whereas now I sort of think that this drag that I do is about expressing myself creatively. It's not necessarily about pretending to be a woman or impersonating a woman or anything like that. It's more just that I love, you know, makeup, just as many girls love makeup and costume and theatre and get dressed up to go out. This is sort of how I get dressed up to go out. And it's kind of a lovely way over the years to find comfort and a safe place to express femininity. And then ultimately, I think I've really married the two, and I've become like masculine and feminine isn't necessarily male, and feminine isn't necessarily female. It's more just sort of different types of qualities and energies. Yeah. And I kind of like embodying all of those and not really thinking about, what am I supposed to do? And just doing like, what do I feel like?
I feel like you have quite a powerful feminine energy. And I think sometimes people can associate femininity with timidness or softness, which is still a good thing.
Yeah.
How did you go about defining what femininity meant to you and taking, I guess, the positive aspects of it?
Yeah. I think that it's funny, Chaz Bono, who's Cher's son, he and I were friends, and I remember we were sitting on his couch chatting like early on in our friendship, and I can't remember, I think he described that I had a feminine energy, which was about 2014, and I traditionally would have taken that as like a negative or like as an attack almost, like, I don't have feminine energy, what are you talking about, like I'm a boy. But because Chaz is a friend and he's a trans man, so he's got this fascinating understanding of gender through his own journey, I like listened to him say that I had feminine energy, and I was like, okay, rather than, maybe I'll just listen to that and take that on board and understand what that means. And I think it's almost sometimes, because the words feminine is associated with female and masculine is associated with male, I feel like I've been doing a lot of research lately about masculinity, interestingly, and it's almost like those words feel limited in what they're trying to describe, because when you describe, listen to some like, not like incel men's podcasts, but some like educated men, not Jordan Peterson, talk about masculinity, and this guy who's a professor describes masculinity, and I'm like, well, that's also femininity, like talking about like leadership and nurturing and providing and protecting, and like I think that these ideas of what men are supposed to do and what women are supposed to do, they're kind of some of the things that are holding us back. And I think feminine, I guess, like, it's weird, right? Because like feminine energy, like in a book, is like nurturing, it's compassionate, it's considerate, it's more gentle, or it's more, but all of those things can be like, and then masculine is like direct and linear and strong and protecting, and I don't know, it feels kind of like limited for me to say like, oh, this is what women are supposed to be, or this is what men are supposed to be, because I think all of us embody qualities that are both feminine and masculine.
100%.
And so sometimes when I think about like what is I almost feel like I'm post feminine or post masculine, where I'm like just me existing.
Yeah.
But I do think that like those ideas of femininity and masculinity kind of help me to understand where I laid maybe like on a spectrum of those qualities. But ultimately now I'm just like, I don't know. It's like one of those things where I'm like, I don't think I've really thought about feminine and masculine, because I'm like, I'm just being me, which is kind of a nice place to get to. But I think that those labels and those words really help me to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I suppose the introduction of the concept of gender fluidity, which now feels like it's been around forever, but really hasn't been around for that long. How has that shaped your self-expression over the years?
Yeah, the idea that boys can be feminine and girls can be masculine was a real revelation for me when Chaz actually brought it up in 2014. I was like, really? I just never thought. I just always thought like boys had to be masculine, and if I wasn't, that I was failing somehow. So just that idea that however you present yourself, and it's beyond like the physical trappings of like hair and makeup and jewelry. I think it's more about like an internal sense of identity. It's more just that liberating idea that however you actually feel on the inside is okay for you to show up as.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk to us a little bit about your time going right back on Australian Idol?
Yeah.
And how that shaped, I guess, Australia's perception of you?
It was 2003, so 21 years ago. I went along the first day out of drag as Shane, and I got knocked back. So I went back the next day in drag as Courtney, and then made it through. And again, at that time, like I was 21, and I just was doing what I loved. I don't think I was quite old enough or aware of the world enough to know that there was anything that could be wrong about me doing drag, because I lived in a bubble in Oxford Street and everybody was gay and lots of people did drag and that was celebrated and it was just sort of totally normal. So to go on television and do it, I just almost expected everybody to accept me and treat me the same. And I kind of did, which was great. And then Dicko was someone who was a real hero and champion of me. And I think he, being British, maybe grew up with a different idea of like drag and queer identity than a lot of Australian men might have. And so he was quite happy to get on board and make jokes about me, and his daughters loved me and what I did. And I think he saw that and thought, hang on a minute, he's a record company executive. There's something in this. And I feel that was also, his support was really instrumental in me being accepted the way that I was. And today I still get people come up to me and say, I remember watching you on Idol, like coming out to my parents or just having a conversation with my parents about like that girl is a guy, and then explaining like having these almost adult conversations with their parents, even if they're not queer themselves, but just the concept of gender or the concept of how somebody looks maybe being different to what you expect it to, and that just shifting people's perceptions in a little way.
Yeah. If you strip away all of the hair and makeup and cute outfits, by the way.
Thank you.
Are there things that Courtney does or says that Shane wouldn't do and vice versa? Like, is there a dichotomy there between...
I think flirting with straight men, as Courtney, I feel a confidence in doing that, because even though I'm not, textbook what they're attracted to, I know that men are very visual creatures and they can't help but flirt, and I can't help but flirt. So I do have friends though. I really admire like my male friends who will flirt with straight men in a playful way, because I think I maybe grew up in a world where like you didn't do that because you'd cop a punch. And I'd say like that's probably one of the real major differences. I think I'm pretty the same in drag or out of drag, but I think when I'm in drag, like it's an event and people like are like excited by the visual that they see, and then it's easy to flirt with straight men in drag.
Yeah, definitely.
But out of drag, I have no power there. So
You're gorgeous.
yeah, I'm just a gifted amateur out of drag.
You're obviously a very powerful advocate for the queer community. What is the message that you're most passionate about sharing?
I think it's something we touched on earlier, and it's just that idea that queer identity is simply about authenticity. Even if you think about the word queer, right? Like, I don't know, what's the opposite to queer? Like normal or like the default. Like queer is something that's like weird or other or like out of the box of what is the status quo. And I think the status quo fits a lot of people, probably most people well enough, but because of that, people often who are straight and cis and have like quote normal is a cycle on a washing machine, people have like normal lives, they kind of just go along without really ever questioning anything, because everything does kind of fit well enough. And I think one of the blessings of being queer is that like things didn't fit me, and not even in a way that I could like conform. Like I was just irrepressible as a kid without being conscious of it, and it just sort of stood out even without trying. And then ultimately that's led me to be in a place where I questioned everything and decided like, oh, actually does this fit? Like, do I want this? Like whether it's like career, family, kids, dating, all of those things, I've sort of had a critical analysis of all of those things, and I can say that all of those facets of my life are very much authentically who I want to be. And I think that the idea behind sort of the queer community is like, who do you love? How do you express yourself? And are those things what you were told they were supposed to be when you're growing up? And I think that's kind of an important lesson for everybody, even if the ultimate answer is, oh yeah, this status quo actually does fit me perfectly. That's also okay. But it's just about, getting closer to the truth of what your identity is.
Yeah. You come across as quite confident and self-assured, but you're human, so I'm assuming you experience self-doubt like everybody else. How does that show up for you now?
I guess creatively, most recently, I was doing a Sydney Festival show, and I was doing a new number. And like Sydney Festival, it's this big glossy arts festival, and I was headlining a show. Really, I should have just done something I had already done and I knew would slay. Like try new material at like Newcastle Fringe.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing. Sorry, Newcastle.
We love you.
And then know what works and do that on stage at Sydney Festival. But instead, everybody was like, there's new numbers. There's all this like excitement in the rehearsal period. And I decided to do a brand new number. And it was a bit of a deviation from the energy of the rest of the show. And I had that like that insecure artist brain, just not self-doubt and second guessing and but sort of still sticking to the process. And the preview, I was like, oh, maybe I should just cut it. I'll just sing the number straight. Like, don't worry about this story component that I'd added. And then I really went away and sort of had a good chat to myself, and I was like, okay, you've been doing this for 23 years. You know what you're doing. Instead of approaching this as, I think I've often been like the younger person or the newbie and had that like bright-eyed approach to things and looking for validation from others creatively, or whether that's an audience or, you know, online or wherever. And I had a moment where I was like, hang on, what if you're actually like really good at this thing, and rather than wondering if you're good, sort of approaching it as like as if you're more of a master at this cabaret thing, and really interrogating this number and working out the weak points and the strengths. And I went away and I spoke to a writer friend, and we sort of workshopped it, and I just tweaked little bits, and I did it on opening night, and it was just like cabaret magic. And it was so validating. And I know that like taking risks as anybody is important, but I think my risks for the last few years have been a bit too safe. I think like with greater expectation of me in the public eye delivering a high quality product, I was like, I don't want to take risks. I just want to like deliver something good. But yeah, it was kind of really validating that. And then also hearing other people, other artists in the show around me having their self-doubts was really lovely, because everybody, particularly, you know, in the creative industries, but obviously everybody has insecurities in general. But with regards to performing, I was surrounded by other people who were all questioning their numbers or not sure about this, and it just helped me to remember that we all go through that. And quite often I'm doing solo shows, so that's all happening in my head, but I don't see anybody else struggling. And so that was like weirdly comforting. It's that thing that happens as you get older, that you have more experience, and so you can look back and say, oh, there's all of these times I was really worried, and most of the time, 99% of the time, that worry was not valid. And yeah, just stepping back, taking a moment, having a chat with yourself, being objective about things, and just trying to reframe it in a way that's more helpful.
Yeah. I like that advice.
Something else we've been talking a little bit about is how people can set healthy boundaries. Have you had any experience with pushing yourself too far out of your boundaries, or learning how to set boundaries over the years? Yeah,
boundaries. It's funny because boundaries as a concept feels like a new kind of, not new, but kind of like buzzword.
It can be buzzy.
It can be buzzy, but like boundaries are so important. Like knowing what you feel comfortable with. I don't know, maybe I grew up in a world where you kind of didn't have boundaries. We definitely didn't have language around what boundaries were, and you kind of just did stuff to please people or help people, or you'd extend yourself beyond. And you always said yes, which is it's not a bad thing to say yes, but having those limits and understanding what you do feel comfortable with and then stating them can be really empowering, not just for you but for the other person, because sometimes when we're trying to please someone else's request, like if you put yourself in their shoes, they probably don't want you to feel uncomfortable either. It's just that they don't know that you feel uncomfortable because you haven't expressed your boundary. So perhaps in a practical term, I'm trying to think of a practical boundary example. This is a bit of a dumb one, but I've joined Hinge and I'm dating, like I had other apps, but I was always a bit like, didn't find them very fruitful. And then I've recently felt like my cold little dark heart sort of have a little spark and think like, oh, I'm ready to be hurt again. No, it's a negative way of looking at things. But one of my I guess it's a boundary when dating with apps is, which worked during COVID, but less so, definitely less so before COVID and less so after COVID, is a video date as the first date. Because, I don't know, but you get to a first date with someone you've seen a few pictures of, you've had a little text chat with, and you usually know instantly whether this is going to be the most painful 60 minutes of your week or not. And so I do like a video date, and sometimes people are like, oh, I don't. That actually only one person has said, oh, can I think about that? And I was like, yeah, of course. Go for it. Think about it. And then he was like, oh, I don't think I really feel comfortable with the video date. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. He's like, okay, so shall we meet up on Monday? And I was like, oh, no. That's my boundary. Is that, and honestly, I've done it consistently, and I haven't had any bad
That's great.
dates when I do it, because I see their face, you hear their voice, you get a bit of a gauge of like their sense of humor, what their voice sounds like, how their face moves. You can't smell them, so you know there's still some left to the unknown. Yeah, but yeah, I kind of, it's something that it's not quite. It is a boundary, but it's not quite the same thing as the thing what we're getting at. But yeah,
I think that's great. That's a wonderful.
Yeah, and it works.
Concept.
I love that. If I was single, I'd be doing that all over 100%.
again.
You just don't have to leave.
Yeah.
Get dressed. Trackies
so
from the bottom
handy.
down.
We missed out on that whole.
We did. We missed the dating app era.
Yeah, it's probably helpful. I don't know if it's.
It seems stressful.
Yeah.
I think that. I think there'll be like we see like swings and like the pendulum swinging from left to right when it comes to any sort of social trend. And with dating, we've gotten so good at online and app dating, but I kind of feel there's a little bit of a return to like old school analog dating. And a friend of mine asked if I was open to being set up, and we've been friends for like 24 years. So I was like, okay, yeah, like if you think that this person and I will get on, then I'm open to that. I think you should be choosy about who you let set you up. But I'm kind of all about like the digital screening, but then the good old analog dating and like meeting people in real life through friends or friends of friends. And I think like that old school dating just is a bit more real. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you get that ability to have like that instant chemistry is so, it's either there or it's not.
Yeah.
And that's potentially what's missing from the very first flat screen static photo version of online dating. So I feel like the video call is kind of cool in between.
Yeah, it's like as good as you can get to real life without leaving the house.
Yep. I wonder if we're one of the first generations that's really focused on boundaries because so much of our life has been digital. Like technology, we're very similar in age, all of us in this discussion, and technology has basically just outpaced our own growth and aging. And so we've been exposed to so many things. We've had to keep up so quickly. And now it's just like, no, it's too fucking much. I have to put little protection mechanisms in place. Whereas maybe that's why our parents and previous generations never talked about it as much, and it is buzzy for us.
And I think they probably had more clearly defined roles and expectations, whereas like men did this and women did that, and you went and you got a job and then you said goodbye and you went to work and you came home and you kissed the kids goodnight, and it was kind of all there. Whereas we're like just
we're out there.
every direction, doing it all, following our dreams and passions, and so maybe we need those boundaries. I mean, another weird boundary is like the screen time on my phone. I have my social media, which I always click ignore the limit, but I have it set for like an hour a day, which I should probably just be more realistic and go for like 2 hours. But that boundary that I've imposed is actually really helpful because it'll pop up and it'll be like, ding, that's your limit reached for today. The other day it got to 11 p.m. and it popped up and I was like, oh, I made it all the way to 11 p.m. and I'd only used 60 minutes of social media.
That's so good.
But it just sort of like reminds me to like put my phone down every 15 minutes, which I quite like.
I tried that for so long. I reckon I had the screen time limit on for about 2 years and I was like, I just kept hitting ignore. I just had to delete the apps. I'm like, I clearly don't have very good self-control, so I'm an all or nothing type of gal. Like a theme that's kept coming up today is this concept of fluidity and progression. We're always changing and evolving throughout our lives. how has the way you show up as Courtney changed over time? And do you imagine a time where Courtney might not show up at all?
I imagine from like an absolute like vanity standpoint, and also like having the energy, like it's a lot of work, like doing hair and makeup and getting into drag. I mean, I'm not wearing heels now, but like wearing heels and like it's not comfortable. There might come a time where I just can't be bothered with the discomfort. And I can imagine, like, I don't know, I feel like if you mean on my personal journey, will I always sort of be Courtney in some way? I think like internally, yes. Externally, I wonder, like, I don't know, I think about like I've always been like a vixen, and now I'm like confronted with the same thing that women confront as they get older, which is like how to age gracefully. I mean, I have the privilege that I could just like come out in a blue rinse wig and go straight from like vixen to maternal.
We've talked about dyeing our hair blue when we get old.
100%. That is my future self. Down here. It's going to happen.
But I think like as far as like society goes, as like a concept, like gender being a concept, I think that like most people who are born female love the more feminine things, and most people who are born male love the more masculine things. Like there's truth to those ideas. But I think the problem is that for a long time we had very discrete boundaries on those identities. And I think that if those limits don't feel right to you, the important thing is to disregard them and do what feels true to yourself. And so I can imagine a world where like the idea of like gender and what we like, if you took what a modern man looks like today and what a modern woman looks like today, like I don't know who are the I mean, Kim Kardashian is probably like, I was going to say Chris Hemsworth, but he's actually like so masked.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, even remember when David Beckham was like wearing a headband and like, and that was like, wow, what's he doing? It was like breaking the space-time continuum by
keeping his hair out of his face.
Yeah. Like taking like a Harry Styles or a Timothy Chalamet. I mean, imagine taking Timothy Chalamet and Kylie Jenner back to like 1985 and people would not know what's going on with either of them because they just wouldn't understand what Kylie Jenner was. And I'm not even meaning this in a rude way. Just the concept of that much hair and that much makeup and the features of the human body being what they are on her is something that just didn't exist in the 80s. Like your Tony Armstrongs or your Hamish Blakes or your blokes who are on TV now, if you took them back to the 80s, men would be like, wow, what a fucking bunch of pansies. Like, they're all soft. And I think there's something in that because we've seen just even in our lifetimes how gender has changed. And so I think the idea that gender is fluid isn't some like radical concept. Like we all have actual quantifiable evidence of how gender has been fluid in our lifetimes with regards to how men and women performed masculinity and femininity over our lifetimes. And so I think that getting to a place where things like pink for girls and blue for boys, or like trucks for boys and Barbies for girls. It's not saying that all boys have to wear dresses and play with Barbies at all. It's just saying like what feels like, if you're a girl and you like science or you like cars or you like cooking, like whatever it is, it should be available to you.
100%.
Yeah.
You're probably going to say the same thing.
It's funny because I feel like it is like society's progressing so much, but we have young children and it blows my mind how gendered the clothing and the toys still are. And even though we are very, very open with whatever they want to buy, they do somehow, or they have, actually my 3-year-old still loves wearing a tutu, which makes me really happy. But it just happens that they end up with these trucks and they end up with blue. Yeah. And like there's so much that's unfortunately outside of your control. Yeah. And I'm surprised that society hasn't progressed quicker, to be honest.
I remember on ABC, it was called Little Kids Big Questions. It was a segment that I did where I was there in drag and there was like young kids asking questions, and there was a boy, I think his name was Leon, and he had like a little bow tie and he came prepared with his notes. And I remember him saying to me that he liked dancing.
Oh, beautiful.
And he said, but not like ballet, like with the tutu or anything like that.
Oh.
And he was like 6, and I was like, oh, he's already
Like
so defensive.
self-correcting.
Like this thing that he loves doing, he's already learnt that he has to correct himself or like say not like that. And so obviously like his parents have supported him in dancing, and at dancing he would be surrounded with other kids who like dancing, but somewhere someone's gotten to him and shamed him for wanting that. And I think that having supportive parents who allow kids to express themselves however that is obviously really important. But then also like, just because you give your kid a variety of toys doesn't mean the boys aren't still going to gravitate towards the trucks. Maybe because just that's what they like, but then also because our whole society has been built around that idea of, to reduce it down, blue for boys and pink for girls.
Yeah.
Which interestingly, I think that only came into existence in the 1940s when retailers realised that people were passing clothes and toys on from generation to generation, whether they were boys or girls, because we didn't have a colour-coded system. So the marketing companies were like, oh, if we make blue for boys and pink for girls, then you can't give your pink clothes to your son
Make more money.
and we'll make more money. And that's how that whole concept of coloured gendered toys and clothes came in. And so it's just fascinating to know that people will get outraged, like, wow, pink, you can't put that boy in pink, or you can't put that girl in blue, or like the toys have to be blue for boys and pink for girls. And it's like, oh, that's just actually a marketing scheme to sell more toys and clothes to you, when really if we did away with those concepts and just said, well, what toys do you like?
Yeah.
I think it would be better for everybody and everyone would save money.
100%.
100%.
I find it really interesting, like what I've caught myself doing on the flip side. Like I've a daughter who's 3, just turned 3, and since she was born, I've been so aware of not imposing the sort of very restrictive and narrow views of what a girl or a woman is supposed to be, and like introduce her to like the concept of gender neutrality early on. And when she starts to gravitate towards really girly things, I started panicking, like, have I failed? Have I fucked this all up as a mother? And she just loves it. Like, she just loves makeup.
things.
She like wants to sit there. She puts makeup on me, goes all over my face, and she just has a ball. And like, maybe this doesn't need to be as stressful as I'm making it, and I need to have more acceptance towards who she is, even if it means she gravitates towards like societal norms and outdated concepts. It's been a really interesting self-learning journey. We talk about this a lot with being mums of young children.
Yeah, it must be so interesting because you have these intellectual understandings of, well, you know what it was like growing up for you, and you understand now as adults like men and women and gender, and then you're trying to provide that to your kids. But I think sometimes the whole point is just making sure that the opportunities are there and that the support is there, and the understanding that like if it's makeup that you like, then great, but also she might also love science or something else as well. And it's allowing young people to express themselves however that shows up. And the thing is, there are reasons that those stereotypes exist, right? Like whatever it is, I mean, makeup as a concept is obviously something we invented, but there is something about femininity that is more commonly associated with women, but it's just not making sure that we don't limit people
within that
to that narrow box.
Do you have other drag identities that you express yourself through?
Not really, only sort of like jokingly.
Yeah.
There was like a summer where it was after Idol, and I think it was like Christmas 2005, 2006, where I got offered this like job that wasn't like paying enough, but I needed the money. And so I said to them that I would do it, but not as Courtney.
Oh, you can't afford Courtney.
Yeah, can't afford Courtney, so you get Roxanne Debris.
Ooh.
And she was like more of like a drag queen, like a loud nasal voice and big foam wigs and over the top costumes and like giant makeup. And so that was kind of like a fun while. And she kind of lives on. Friends from Drag Race, Willam in Alaska, will often like joke about Roxanne Debris in silly ways. So it's almost like this idea of this like low rent, low budget
Love it.
drag persona exists in the ether somewhere. Actually, I was writing, I've been working on a script, a fiction novel, and the character is not me because it's fiction, but at the moment her name is Courtney, and I was trying to think of like, I was thinking about changing her name so that I don't know, I'll get to the end and I'll decide. I can just do a find and replace all. But I changed the boy name of the character to not Shane.
Yep.
So it's like at the moment his name's Bronson. I don't know why. It's the first
good
name that
name.
came to my head. And then I was like, oh, maybe I could change her name to Roxanne Debris. Like maybe Roxanne, because like Roxy, and I wanted to be a redhead as well.
Yeah.
And
The
Roxy feels like a
Roxy.
redhead name. I love like the limit of my creativity was like, she's a 30-something flame-haired podcast influencer. And so,
Plenty
and
of
then
them around to take inspo from.
right. And I picture it being turned into a scripted TV series, and I picture being able to play myself. So I was like, I reckon with the right filters I could do early 30s, but I didn't want to stretch it to early 20s. That's just foolish.
No, believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself,
Nobody wants
but
to be
also
20-something.
be aware of the limitations of yourself.
Yes,
I think
true.
Marsha Hines said to me on Australian Idol, and I only just worked out what it meant 20 years later. She said, know your limits. Because we did grow up in a you can be, do and have anything generation.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that whilst that encouragement is wonderful, I think also being aware of what your limits are is good too. I think part of me not knowing what my limits were was why I got to where I did, because I was completely unaffected by failure. I would just keep going
Love it.
and not really realise. But now that I get older, especially when it comes to performing, I would always try and whatever I was going to do, it was going to be to 100% of my capacity, and then I'd get on stage and I'd probably end up doing it like 90%. And now I'm like, maybe you're better off aiming for a smart 80%, giving yourself some like wiggle room and doing that 80% really well. And once you do, then go to 85 and slowly work your way up. But
That's great.
yeah, knowing your limits. I think that's exactly what Marsha meant, which was pick keys that are appropriate for your voice. Pick songs and keys that are appropriate for your voice.
Leave the others for the shower.
Yeah, exactly.
What was
the
your
shower.
first book called?
What was it called? Oh, Caught in the Act.
And so Caught in the Act.
Yes.
What was how did you find the difference between writing Caught in the Act and then a fiction?
Yeah, what's interesting is that writing my memoir was the thing that made me want to write the fiction, because there was truth that I couldn't put in the memoir because it was non-fiction. And even though I was telling my story, obviously that involves lots of other people's stories, and you want to respect their boundaries. And everybody who was mentioned in the book, I sent them the part about them and checked it was okay and made changes accordingly. And I thought, there's actually just things that you can't say in non-fiction. It felt like I could be more honest in fiction, even though it was not technically true. You can actually find the essence of the truth more because you're not restricted by other people's feelings. And so the book really takes like a bunch of different life experiences and combines them into one story. But it's kind of lovely where you can just sort of, you don't have to be bound by the truth, or like maybe things didn't go a certain way. And it's really fun writing a fiction book and just becoming familiar with all the characters and thinking, well, what would this person do and what would they do? And it's been quite fun to do that. There's 3 main characters, and just understanding like what their histories are and why they would act a certain way is a really fascinating psychological study.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you'd be so good at creating characters already. That'd be taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite part of like, what was the meme that I read? I've given up on dating for love. Now I'm just... Is this it? Dating for love isn't working. Now I'm dating to conduct psychological experiments and collect data.
That
sort
is
of
me between the ages of 15 and 30.
Yeah. That's where I've been for like the last 10 years, I think. I've just been collecting data for this fiction book. So
It's all research.
it was all research. It was
It's
all
a
a tax
tax
deduction.
We're going to be friends, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we could ask you a million questions all day, but I'm very conscious of your time. I have a few final questions that I'd love to ask. So I just would like to know how you define the concept of self-expression.
For me, self-expression is something when you're in your teens and your 20s is more reactive to the world around you because you're trying on things and seeing what fits. And so I think it's different at different ages. Now, for me, self-expression is having had enough life experience to understand what I like and what I don't like and doing more of the things that I like. And by like, it's about feeling connected to that sense of self-understanding. Like when you do something, does it make you feel good inside? Like, do you get those like literal pleasant sensations on your body that come from an internal sense of understanding, as opposed to I did this thing and other people think this thing's cool and other people like me now because I've done that. That does give you a sense of like feeling good, but it's almost like it's something that happens on the outside, from the outside in. Whereas I feel like self-expression can happen from the outside in. And I think in our teens and 20s, often that's how we learn. Like we listen to what's going on around us. We see what things we gravitate towards. We try them on. We decide whether they fit us or whether we want to change them a little bit or whether they don't suit us at all and we discard them. And then you kind of go on having a better understanding of what your self-expression is. I think sometimes people can get caught up in self-expression for external validation, which, like I said, is fine as long as you eventually sort of learn that it's actually something that makes you feel good as well. Because I think as long as you're... Validation is something that we as humans all seek. And I think for a long time I thought, no, I have to be completely independent and not require any sort of external validation. I have to be like strong and impervious. And I realized, actually I'm a human and it's nice to feel like validated by other people, but it's about how much you allow that to sort of impact your own sense of self. I think having a strong sense of self and leading with leading by responding to the things that make you feel good inside is really helpful. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's all about like the waiting. Like validation is totally fine and it's human
It's
nature.
human.
But maybe it's like the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
80
Like-
here, 20 out there.
Yeah.
Like with like body stuff, for most of my 20s, I've always been doing drag, and in the gay scene, there's this real value put on muscles and your body and like looking like a hot slut, which everyone, you know, in their own way, well, maybe not everyone, but I love looking like a hot slut wherever I can. But in the gay scene, there was always this idea of like still masculinity being important and muscles being important. And so I would like try and go to the gym and I'd be like, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough unless I have muscles or I fit into this sort of identity. And so then I pushed against that for a long time. And then as I was approaching 40, I thought, that's a real number when things start to change in your body, and decided that I wanted to focus a bit more on my fitness and started going to the gym and working out. And then my motivation, like I'd be lying if I didn't say that like I enjoy looking like a hot slut. But I think maybe that's like the validation that I get from the external is maybe 20% of why I do it. And I think that the largest part of why I enjoy working out and going to the gym is actually about how I feel on the inside, how my body feels, the endorphins hit that you get from working out, like all of those things. And even just the very literal, it's almost like a sense of, there's not many things in your life that you can do and see a direct result. Like if you go and you work out consistently and your diet's consistent, then you see this like actual physical change in your body looking and feeling. And in a world of chaos, it's actually something that you can feel like a sense of empowerment over your effort. Yeah, you see like a physical result in your body, and like chemically you feel a result, and that's like really good. Obviously, there's parts where it can tip over into unhealthy because you get a sense of control, and that can turn into other sorts of body dysmorphia and eating disorders and things like that. But in moderation, I really enjoyed that sense of it. And so I like the part where I'm like, yeah, I do like the way that I look, and I like that other people like the way that I look. And even though that's superficial, I think what I've worked out, it's not the majority of the driver and the mover of why I do it, but it's still a part of being human. And so I think making sure you get those balances about why you're doing things skewed, it should be 60% at least for you.
Of course, our final question that we're asking every guest is, what does it mean?
I was going to say, I do actually have, just before mentioning drag names, I get like pimples and bumps on the backs of my arm, keratosis pilaris, which I thought, I mean, I don't want to be called keratosis as a drag name, but she does sound like a drag queen. Which is why I do love the AHA and the lactic acid products
That's so
nice.
get rid of those bumps.
I love the little product plug that we didn't even ask for.
I know. But it's true. So
But they
I thought I'd throw that
really
in.
beautiful products. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks,
Sorry.
Courtney.
No, you're
Last
fine.
question.
Last question is, what does it mean to you to be selfish?
I think it's a boundaries thing. I think it's about being aware of how I feel. I think like I love being social, but then I also like my solitude, and it's knowing in my calendar, like I've been actually looking at my calendar over the next 10 days, and I'm like, I don't think you have enough selfish time in there to just be at home by yourself. Like Monday I've got nothing on, but I am planning on getting drunk on Sunday night, so I'll probably be a bit hungover, so that doesn't count as
not quality selfish
time. It's just like trying to survive selfish time. So yeah, I think it's about me having those boundaries with my time and being able to like have me time, and that's really kind of just not being around other humans. It's just being at home. It can mean reading a book. It can mean napping. It can mean like going down to the beach and going for a walk. But just it's about solitude for me, selfishness, I think.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you both.
It was a great chat.
Thank you so much.
This episode of Selfish was recorded on Wurundjeri land. Always was, always will be Wurundjeri land.